graduated, elevated. Now it's my time to shine, yeah, let's go. Major moves, power moves, take it to the top one time, non-stop.
Hello, Jo, and welcome to Ph.D. Hard Talk. Thank you so much for your time today. Could you please introduce yourself, what you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Fabulous. Hello, Noma. It's very nice to see you on this chat. I've been looking forward to this. My name is Jo Trevenna. I am an academic researcher. I am an author. I also have a huge gap between when I did my PhD and then later on returning to this work in terms of research. There are themes, however, that have seen me through my entire career, and I'm looking forward to exploring some of those with you.
Lovely. So just for the audience at home, you came back into higher education in 2021 in terms of your PhD.
Well, I did my PhD, I've completed my PhD in 2002. So we're talking a long time ago. And so what I did, I'll give you a little bit of a summary in terms of the squiggly journey of my career. So I left school at 16 and I didn't even think that university would be for me in any shape or form. It wasn't something that somebody like me did, actually. And I can reflect on that increasingly about the reasons why. However, I then went and undertook a series of really dodgy, low paid, going nowhere kind of jobs. And I then knew that there was something else. There had to be something else. So I took what seemed to be for me a huge leap of faith, and I did a part-time evening class, and I completed A-level English at a local college. It was 2 evenings a week whilst working full-time. And I absolutely loved it. It started to lift my head. It started to open up all sorts of opportunities of thought, actually. I'd always enjoyed reading. Reading had been my thing. If I had any subject at school that drove me forward, it was English. So that was a good place to start. And then I did that course and I thought, well, that's not enough. I need to do more. So I looked at what else was on offer at that local college because I didn't really have the opportunity to go anywhere else. And I chose art history, and that opened up another range of avenues for me to explore, and I thoroughly loved that. And then I thought, well, that's not enough. I still need to do something else with my head, because the low paid, going nowhere jobs were still continuing at that point. And then I thought, university, could it actually happen? So I looked at all of them, local universities, and I contacted De Montfort University at Bedford, which was my most local university at that point. And they were so helpful, and they offered me really basic support about how you apply to university. As I say, it wasn't anything I was comfortable with, and they accepted me, and that felt in itself a joyous thing. And I still remember the day of going to university. I was 23 at the time, and I felt like a geriatric compared to the young, sprightly youths that were charging through the gates at De Montfort in Bedford. And I remember the anxiety, the sheer dread of what this experience was going to be. Not for one moment do I regret going to university age 23 and doing that course. It was wonderful. And in terms of setting me on a very different path from the dodgy jobs that I've been experiencing, and that real sense of lacking fulfillment in my work. It was joyous, and the modules, every single module I relished. I was the classic mature student who got there very early, went to the library, did all of that additional work. I had a wonderful time. So I did that. And I surprised myself by getting a first. Again, you might be sensing a kind of an imposter syndrome, lack of self-confidence thing. I wish I could say to you, Noma, at this point, that's gone away, but it's still very much there. These neural pathways, they're so hard to shift, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I then thought, okay, what can I do? And I thought, well, I can't just carry on with this. I need some sort of route through. But then I spotted an advert for a PhD studentship, which would pay me some money, which would help out enormously, at the University of Hertfordshire. And again, I was very lucky that I rang somebody up, and they were so wonderful. And this was Dr. Sharon Monteith at the University of Hertfordshire, and she was so kind and so welcoming. And I applied, and I went down there for the day, and it was competitive, but I got the PhD studentship. And then I found myself on a PhD program, which I'd never thought I'd be able to do. So that's kind of like my first stage of my academic journey. I did some teaching at the university at that point, which was joyous, but again, that real crippling sense of imposter syndrome did kind of limit the way in which I was able to put myself forward. I could kick myself, of course, looking back, but these things happen. It's part of the journey, isn't it? So I did that for about a year after I completed my PhD. But at that point, I wanted to get a mortgage. I wanted other aspects of my life to grow and to develop. So I happened to be speaking to somebody who was working at the school that I personally went to, secondary school. And they started to do what was called then a GTP program. Look, untrained teachers, and they trained them on site. And that's when my education career started at that point. So I joined the secondary school that I went to as a youth and started my education career, which lasted just over 20 years. I then came out of that having completed 2 headships, and I wanted to do something different. But I always had this residual sense of I haven't completed my research. And I delved into this area of Carnivalesque Leadership, which had been hanging around at the back of my brain for over 20 years, having been introduced to it on my undergraduate degree. It wasn't called Carnivalesque Leadership, but I was introduced to the work of Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian philosopher, whose work really informs the book that I've recently published with Routledge. So that's quite a summary, okay, Noma, in terms of this is where I'm at right now.
No, that's lovely. So I have a question. So we'll go backwards to front. This was a question for later on, because I think if we cover this now, then we can get into the book after. So I've had a few people come on here and I've asked them this question. Now there's a 50-50% split when it comes to this question. And it is, do you think, in your opinion, higher education breaks the poverty life cycle for individuals and their families, or do you think no?
I can only answer personally. I think at this point, for me, yes, 100%. By undertaking the degree in the first instance, which then enabled me to embark on that education career that I never thought I'd be able to do. It really did unlock so many opportunities which simply I didn't think existed for me. And so it was revolutionary. It was life-changing. Even that first day when I was so full of anxiety in terms of I don't belong here, this isn't for me, that still filters through everything that I do, and particularly the drive in the education world. I still do work in the education sector, and it's so important for me personally to support other individuals to experience that. What you don't want to see is people having that level of anxiety and that level of that real sense of self-doubt, because what you want clearly is young people to know that they do belong in a higher education environment, which was something that I was struggling with and still actually continue to struggle with. But that's what you want to do. And so the work that schools can do, the work that teachers can do, the work that support staff can do in schools to help pupils understand that or if there are barriers, how they can be overcome to accessing higher education.
Yeah, thank you very much. And to move on to the next point, which is imposter syndrome, because you mentioned that you were older and there were challenges essentially, but me as well as a PhD student at the moment, I suffer from that because I came from industry. So I went to work in industry and I've come back. But with the interviews that I've conducted here on PhD Hard Talk, there is an element of, we don't know if we're good enough based on maybe they feel like their supervisor is not supportive enough, or they feel like the environment, in their opinion, is very toxic. What advice or guidance do you have for us as PhDs who are still green and trying to find our feet, essentially?
I think that finding and relying on and being really clear about your bigger purpose can be a way of enabling you to keep your eye on the horizon. When you're inevitably suffering at various points doubt. Doubt is very much part of the human condition, I think, and therefore the management of that doubt about the context that you're in, or self-doubt, can be seen off and through by focusing on the bigger picture, the bigger purpose, if you like, of your work. Because if you're undertaking research into an area that has not been done before, i.e. PhD, the purpose of that work is the thing that can help you to drive forward. Clearly, also being aware of the policies around making sure that you are actually getting the support that you need. And some of that can be incredibly practical. And helps you to operate in a safe space, which you should feel in an education establishment.
No, thank you very much. The next question, in terms of a PhD, what are the 3 things that you would share as guidance to somebody looking back to when you started your journey, who wants to apply for a PhD? The 3 key principles that you think that will help you to survive a PhD, essentially.
I think the first one would be understanding that you're not going to know the answer. If you know the answer already, then is that a worthwhile PhD? And so therefore living and leaning into that discomfort around not knowing the answer, and being relishing that actually is a different kind of feeling. So that would be the first one. The second one, to be ensuring that you've got enough of a support network around the combating the potential isolation of doing a PhD, because one lives in one's head an awful lot when you're doing a PhD, because you're doing a lot of thinking up there, and that can become a kind of echo chamber. And so being really clear and very practical actually on the support networks that you've got, whether that's family, friends, whether or not that's PhD colleagues, whether or not that's taking the opportunity of a provision like PhD Hard Talk, where you can have a real sense of there is a community out there, and not being too hesitant to reach out to other people that you meet, either virtually or in person, when it comes to just having that cup of tea, that coffee with somebody to talk through where you're at, because part of that, almost that safety valve release that we all need, can be difficult if you're working in isolation, or if you're working in quite a contained environment, which can happen on a PhD.
Thank you very much. Very insightful, because a PhD, I always say, it is a marathon. It isn't a sprint. And if you sprint, you get burnt out. And I think for somebody who's controlling like me, it's proved rather challenging, because I have so many deadlines that I set myself, and I trip myself up. The final question when it comes to PhDs is publish or perish culture. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. There's a lot of chat on X, and also in terms of different blogs, where PhDs feel like they're being pushed to publish. However, in terms of the job requirements, you have to publish. So the question I have is, there is a fine line here, because PhDs feel like that's very stressful. I just want to concentrate on one thing and get it done. But the world we live in terms of working for somebody, you have to multitask, as you know. So what guidance do you have for us in terms of publish or perish?
Again, my personal experience, I was a little naive when it came to that advice. I published 1 article during my PhD process, and I should have done more. And you know, we can all look back with hindsight, and it's, you know, it's a glorious thing, isn't it? That if I'd have done more, then I would have been in a different position, you know, etc., etc. So I will repeat that mantra to a certain extent. Why didn't I do that? Well, I was also working at the same time, giving myself excuses here, which is not good. But also, I think, again, it was that imposter thing. It was a sense of, if I send this out, is it going to be rejected? Am I then going to go into myself? And all of those kind of anxieties. But the article that I did send out was accepted straight away. And that was great, but I didn't then pursue anything else. I was just kind of, I fell into some sort of comfort around the one publication, which actually didn't come out until much later, ironically, at that time. So again, there's these gaps in my academic career. But I'd been sitting on not literally, I've been sitting on an article on the work of Carrie Fisher. And that was it was just on my computer, and it was actually on a 3.5-inch disc. It was that old that I dusted it off when I'd completed my headshot. I was thinking, okay, I need to scratch that itch of academic research. And I thought, I've got that article there. And I'd really enjoyed writing that. It was about Fisher's work within a postmodern context. And I reread it, and I thought, I'm going to send it off. And I sent it off, and it was accepted. And I think, if only I'd have done that 20 years ago. If only I'd have done that. Hindsight. So I'd very much agree, and I'd very much urge people to make the most of opportunities to go to conferences, to make those connections, to make those publications. I love the way in which PhD Hard Talk embraces the world of new media, because these are different routes through, and everything is not about old school means of publication anymore, but sometimes it is that access to peer review, which does make such a difference in terms of the academic credibility of work.
No, thank you very much. And the question that I have is, you know, I've spoken to a wide, diverse group of individuals, and I asked this question in series 2. And I had a wide range of responses, which is self-funding in terms of your PhD and working full-time while you're completing your PhD, which you've touched on. That's why I'm asking the question. In your opinion, because you've mentioned that, you know, you made a comment which was, oh, I'm making an excuse. But when you're working full-time, having a PhD full-time, and you have life in terms of family and other things that happen, it is quite difficult to manage all of these stresses, because the variables, you can't control what happens when and how. How does one continue? Because, you know, listening to your journey, I think you can reflect back, as you've said, hindsight is a beautiful thing. How does one make that decision to say, I want to self-fund, but I know that there are going to be problems, there are going to be challenges. How am I going to survive on my little canoe boat, essentially, during my journey?
Absolutely, and it's a real pressure, isn't it? It can stop so much good work, and it can stop so much development, the real practicalities of life. I think that, I'll come back to your point, is that a PhD is a marathon, not a sprint, and that might be an ultra marathon for some people. But again, we come back to that idea of the bigger purpose, the idea of the work itself, the thing that you want to solve in your head is so vital to maintaining that drive and motivation, which will dip probably at various points. But the focus on the bigger picture can be crucial. In terms of self-funding, of course, it's more difficult. I wouldn't have done a PhD unless I'd have got that studentship. Because I was in a certain financial position. I needed something to enable the fees to be paid, as well as, you know, a slight wage as well, because that just took some of the pressure off. But I completely understand. I think I'd probably be looking at this point to do a PhD if I hadn't have done it before, and so then that would have been the same situation. I don't think I'd have actually received a PhD by the time I would officially retire, though, at that point, because I would be working and doing the PhD at the same time. And so it is a real issue. However, that bigger purpose can be the driving force, because if not, you're going to have something lingering, which you're not going to be able to express. And so the impetus that you may feel and the barriers that you see, they're real barriers. However, you can take longer to achieve that end outcome, which is so worthwhile.
No, lovely. I think it's quite difficult because the people that seemed so keen on self-funding, there were individuals that needed to relocate from their home countries because they felt like they would have a better future abroad, for example, in the US. But again, also with some of the past interviewees from India, they wanted to start their businesses because they felt like their research in terms of the big pictures you've shared was worth it. But that comes with other challenges as well. So, which is the next question in terms of starting a business from your PhD. I mean, you've published, it's quite similar. So would you say that's a good idea?
Yeah, I guess it would depend on the nature of the PhD. However, because a PhD is about something new, something that adds to knowledge, there will always be opportunities from that. But they may need a little bit more to uncover. And so, you know, you can imagine that in some industries, the PhD gives the validity to the idea or the product or the technology, for example, which can then influence the authenticity and the rigor of the product that is being sold. And so it's not in addition to, but it's fundamental to the success of that business. And the timing of launching into that business, I guess, would be significant because, as we know, self-employment is not straightforward, and there's lots of administration and there's lots of work you need to do. So I'm talking to somebody who is a good marketeer at this point. I'm not a good marketeer. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to learn, but that would be one of the barriers to somebody like me. In terms of presenting a business idea based on that PhD. However, we learn, don't we? Mm-hmm. So it's experiences like this, understanding those kind of support mechanisms, again, which can be so crucial when we make connections with other people.